Well, I think that there's an assumption, and certainly an assumption in the Western world after the Second World War, that that every generation of young people is somehow innately more democratic, more open, more free, more striving towards freedom, more liberal, more reform-minded, more pro-democratic. I think that's an assumption that really needs to be tested, because looking at the way things are evolving in Ukraine and in Russia and in some of the other countries, we cannot take that for granted. If institutions of power are not set up in a way where young people can participate and can somehow turn this idealism that they have into a pro-reform approach, and to a feeling of their activism being appreciated, they may be totally alienated from the institutions of state. I would say what Ukraine lacks actually is a vision that young people could support. Ukraine's leaders have been very bad at articulating any kind of positive vision, a vision of a reformed Ukraine that that young people can take a look at and move towards. So in all ways, I think the older generation is failing the younger generation, not bringing them in, trying to manipulate them, and in a sense, kind of going back to a sort of Soviet style where youth is an object, as opposed to young people being the subject and owners of their own fate. So we can't just take it for granted that by default young people will somehow bring positive change to the country. We have to create avenues and opportunities for them to do so, and that's come through in a lot of the research that I've done. You can see what's happened in Egypt, which is the most recent example of a youth-led protest that actually did bring down the government. Young people made Tahrir Square happen, and what do we have now? A situation where young people have been excluded from any institutions of government, and a system that is really floundering in its way forward, with the sort of more established, with the sort of old guard coming back, in a sense, in a sort of mild form, and young people once more becoming discontent because they feel that they helped the revolution happen, and yet they've been excluded. Which this sort of polarization happens. I can see that in Ukraine. It does require some informed and enlightened leadership. Ukraine, unfortunately, at the moment, from what I see of the way that leadership structures are constructed, put a primacy on loyalty as opposed to merit. You can see a lot of very talented and gifted young people who are unable to make their way because the people who rise in institutions or are channeled into positions of power tend to be those who are loyal to the person who put them there. And anyone who's studied societies will tell you that this is a sure path to disaster, when you rely just on loyalty and you don't promote and support the merit within a society. There was an attempt to bring Ukraine's educational system closer to Europe by signing on to the Bologna process and so on. I see now that there are steps back from that, and I would say that this is a long-term process. Education never produces results immediately, but if the older generation of businessmen and politicians wants to make sure that they have a solid foundation for Ukraine fulfilling all of the expectations that everyone had of it 20 years ago, then they would look to the educational system and enable young people to fulfill their initiatives and ideals, and to support them in this.